Where is the red file? He barked, his tone sharp and commanding. As he emerged through the room like a storm, drawers slammed shut, papers flew off the desk, and clothes from the wardrobe spilled onto the floor. His frustration was palpable, filling the air like a heavy cloud. Andrew, his assistant, stood frozen near the doorway, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Everyone in the office knew when Jungkook lost his temper. No one could soothe the fire. Are you deaf? He growled, his glare slicing through the tense atmosphere. Sir, it was with you yesterday. I don't know where it is now. He slammed, his voice barely audible. Oh, really? Then what happened? Did the earth swallow it whole or did it vanish into thin air? His voice dripped with sarcasm, laced with unmistakable rage. The room, now in utter chaos, resembled a battlefield after a storm. Suddenly, the door creaked open. A maid in her early 20s cautiously stepped inside, her eyes darting between the mess on the floor and the furious man standing before her. She hesitated for a moment before approaching him. Despite her trembling hands, she mustered the courage to speak. Master, what are you looking for? Chunguk paused, his icy gaze shifting to her. The intensity in his eyes was enough to make anyone else crumble. But he stood her ground, albeit nervously. With a sharp note, he motioned for Andrew to leave. The assistant didn't waste a second, bowing deeply before hurrying out of the room. A red file is crucial for today's meeting. He muttered, his frustration still evident. Wine tilted her head, thinking of for a moment before speaking softly. Does it have a black falcon symbol on it? Jungkook's brows furrowed, a flicker of hope momentarily softening his features. Yes, have you seen it? She offered with a small, reassuring smile. One moment, master. Walking over to the dressing table, she opened the second drawer and retrieved the file. Turning back to him, she extended it with both hands. Here it is. I placed it here yesterday while cleaning. If I had known you needed it, I would have given it to you earlier. Choguk's jaw tightened as he took the file from her hands. If anyone else had misplaced it, there would have been hell to pay. But Wine, she always seemed to walk the fine line of his temper without crossing it. Fine, I'm leaving. I don't have time for this. He sat curtly, turning on his heel and striding out of the room. As the door clicked shut behind him, Wine released the breath she had not realized she was holding. Her gaze swept across the room, papers scattered, clothes thrown, drawers left open. She sighed softly. Looks like another day of cleaning up after the storm, she muttered to herself. Kneeling to gather the cloths, despite his temper, she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of pity and admiration for the man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was lunchtime, and the house was filled with the faint aroma of fish cooking in the kitchen. One was busy dusting the corners of the living room, carefully wiping down every surface. Her movements were swift but meticulous, ensuring no speck of dirt remained. The sudden sound of the front door opening broke her focus. She turned to see Jungkook stepping inside, his long, predatory strides exuding authority. His sharp gaze swept the room, and she instantly stopped what she was doing, her hands clutching the dust cloth tightly. Without a word, Jungkook walked into the living room and settled onto the couch like a king on his throne. His posture was relaxed yet commanding, his legs crossed and propped up on the table. The sight sent a wave of nervousness through her. She quickly approached him. Sir, should I prepare the lunch? She asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. His cold eyes met hers briefly before he spoke. What's for lunch? The maid, she made some fish. She began, but his sharp voice cut her off mid sentence. Which made her gaze drop to the floor as she fidgeted with the hem of her apron. Hazel, she murmured. The room fell silent for a moment, the tension too thick it was suffocating. You know, I don't like repeating myself. Don't you? Yes, master, she stammered, her heart pounding. Then you also know I won't eat anything cooked by the other maids. You are my personal maid, not them. His voice was steady but carried an edge that made her knees feel weak. I am sorry, master, she apologized quickly. I was just cleaning your room, so I asked Hazel to prepare lunch for you. He leaned back against the couch, his expression hard as stone. I don't want excuses. Go and make something for me now. She bowed her head deeply, her voice trembling. Yes, master. Without another word, she turned and hurried to the kitchen. Her hands shook slightly as she began gathering ingredients to cook his lunch. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. His mood was already stormy and she didn't want to provoke him further. As she worked, her thoughts raced. Why does he always have to be so demanding? But even as the frustration bubbled within her, she focused on preparing the perfect meal, knowing full well that pleasing him was the only way to keep the peace. Wine worked swiftly in the kitchen, her determination pushing her to prepare a perfect lunch for Jungkook. She whipped up a comforting spread of kimchi, jjigae, savory bulgogi, fluffy steamed rice, and crispy kimchi pancakes. The aroma of the freshly made dishes filled the air, rich and inviting. Once everything was ready, she carefully carried the dishes to the dining table, setting them in front of Jungkook, who had already taken his seat. His cold gaze followed her movements as she arranged the meal. Master, lunch is ready, she said softly, stepping back with a slight bow. Jungkook didn't reply, instead picking up his chopsticks and tasting the food. His expression gave nothing away, but he continued eating, which Wine took as a good sign. As the room settled into silence, Hazel walked in, her heels clicking purposefully against the floor. Her eyes immediately landed on Jungkook, and a practiced sweet smile spread across her face. Master, how's the fish? I made it specially for you. She sat, leaning slightly forward, her tone dripping with faint innocence. Wine froze, her hands nervously clasped in front of her apron. Jungkook didn't even glance at Hazel, continuing to eat calmly. I'm not eating the fish, he stated coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. Hazel blinked, her smile faltering. She looked at the untouched dish of fish on the counter, then at the food Jungkook was eating. Her gaze darkened when she realized it was all one's cooking. Oh, she started, her tone turning sharper. I see. So your little maid thought it was her place to decide what you should eat. Wine's head shot up, her lips parting in surprise at Hazel's harsh words. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to. You're just a maid. Wine, know your place. Hazel sneered, her jealousy barely hidden. Before Wine could respond, Jungkook set his chopsticks down with a soft but delicate clink, the sound silencing the room. Hazel, he said, his tone icy enough to make her stiffen. She turned to him, her expression shifting to one of for sweetness. Yes, master. Do I pay you to run your mouth or to follow orders? Hazel's face turned red with embarrassment, her lips parting as if to argue, but she thought better of it. If you're done here, leave, he added, his voice calm but firm. Hazel clenched her fists, her glare flickering briefly toward Wine before she muttered, Yes, master, and stormed out of the dining area, her heels echoing angrily down the hall. The tension in the room eased silently as Wine lowered her gaze to the floor. She nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, unsure whether to feel relieved or anxious. Jungkook picked up his chopsticks again, and if the interruption had not phased him in the slightest, without looking up, he spoke. Stop apologizing for things you didn't do. Wine, now bring me some water. His words, through curt, held a hint of something she couldn't quite place. Was it acknowledgement, gratitude? She quickly nodded, her voice steady this time. Yes, master. She hurried to fetch the water, her mind racing despite his cold demeanor. His actions spoke volumes. It was the first time she had seen him stand up for her, and it left her both confused and oddly comforted. The grand mansion buzzed with life. The following evening, filled with the chatter of well dressed guests and the soft clinking of glasses. It was a celebration party for Jungkook's recent success, an important business deal that solidified his dominance in the corporate world. The maids moved swiftly, serving drinks and ensuring every guest felt attended to, while dressed modestly yet neatly in her uniform. Was tasked with serving as well. Her hands trembled slightly as she balanced the tray of drinks, knowing that tonight she had to navigate not just Jungkook's sharp gaze, but the scrutiny of his high profile guests. Jungkook sat at the head of the gathering, a vein of power in his tailored suit. His presence dominated the room, and even the most confident of men lowered their voices in his presence. He gestured subtly to Wine as she approached with a tray. Serve my guests, he instructed coolly, his tone leaving no room for refusal. Yes, master, she replied, bowing her head slightly before stepping closer to the group. One of the guests, Anderson, a business associate of Jungkook, leaned back in his chair with a wide grin. His eyes glinted with something unpleasant as they followed Wine's every move. Congratulations, Jungkook, on the deal. Truly impressive. He said, shaking Jungkook's hand firmly. Thank you, Jungkook replied with a curt nod, his gaze briefly flickering to Wine as she approached Anderson with a drink. As Anderson took his glass, his hand deliberately brushed against Wine's. The unexpected contact startled her and her grip faltered. Spilling the drink onto Anderson's crisp white shirt. Oh, I'm so sorry, sir, she exclaimed, her face turning pale with embarrassment. No problem, honey, Anderson replied, his tone oozing with false charm. Accidents happen. His eyes roamed over her shamelessly before he added, why don't you show me the way to the washroom? One hesitated, glancing at Jungkook, who was now watching the scene with a cold, unreadable expression. After a brief pause, she nodded reluctantly. Knowing it was her duty to respect the guests. Of course, sir, please follow me, she said, leading the way down the hallway. As they reached the quieter part of the house, Anderson's steps quickened. Suddenly, he grabbed her wrist, spinning her around to face him. You are quite the pretty little thing, are not you? He said, his voice low and suggestive. Why don't we have a little fun? Jungkook doesn't have to know. One's eyes widened in fear, and she tried to pull her wrist free, but his grip tightened. Sir, please let go. This isn't appropriate. She said firmly, trying to maintain her composure. Oh, don't be shy. I'm sure a maid like you would enjoy some attention. He sneered, pulling her closer. The fear turned into anger as she struggled against him. I said, let me go, she demanded, her voice shaking with both fear and determination. But Anderson only smiled, his other hand reaching toward her before he could go any further. Wine's instincts kicked in. With all her strength, she raised her knee and struck him hard in the stomach. Anderson stumbled back, clutching his abdomen and groaning in pain. Don't you dare touch me again, she shouted, her voice trembling but fierce. She turned and ran, clutching her bruised wrist as tears welled in her eyes. She didn't stop until she reached the kitchen, where she leaned against the counter trying to catch her breath. Her mind raced. What just happened? Did anyone see? She winced as she looked at her wrist, now red and swollen from Anderson's grip. Despite the fear still lingering on her chest, she felt a spark of pride for standing up for herself. One's face was as pale as a sheet as she rushed toward the servants' quarters, her heart pounding like a drum, but with each step, the thought of Anderson catching up with her made her stomach churn. Instead of going to her quarters, she took a sharp turn and hurried into the nearest room, Jungkook's. Her trembling hands pushed the door closed behind her, and she leaned against it, trying to calm her erratic breathing. The safety of the locked room brought her a momentary sense of relief. But a stinging pain in her wrist quickly pulled her attention. Sitting on the plush couch, she looked at her wrist. It was red and swollen. The faint marks of Anderson's fingers etched onto her skin. Tears spilled over her cheeks as she winced, the memory of his leering face haunting her. She sniffled and reached for the first aid kit sitting on a nearby shelf. With unsteady hands, she fumbled to apply antiseptic to her bruised wrist. Her sniffles turned into soft sobs as she pressed the cotton pad against her skin. Suddenly, the sound of the door unlocking made her breath hitch. Her head snapped toward the door, her body freezing in terror. Is it Anderson? Has he followed me here? But as the door opened, her heart thudded in a strange mix of fear and relief. It was Jungkook. He stepped inside, his sharp eyes scanning the room before landing on her. His expression shifted subtly as he took in her tear-streaked face and trembling figure. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice low but with a hint of suspicion. Vine quickly wiped her tears and looked away, trying to hide her wish behind her back. Nothing, master. I am sorry for intruding. She stammered, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. Jungkook's sharp eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, his dropping presence making her feel even smaller. Don't lie to me. He said coldly, what happened? Nothing, master. She sniffed, trying to sound convincing, but the trembling in her voice betrayed her. His patience snapped and his voice turned icy. Tell me. Before she could react, his hand darted forward, grabbing her arm gently but firmly. He pulled her wrist from behind her back, and his eyes darkened when he saw the bruises. The red, swollen marks seemed to ignite something dangerous in him. His jaw clenched and his grip tightened ever so slightly, though not enough to hurt her. His eyes, now a storm of rage, flicked to her tear-filled ones. Who did this to you? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous, though his grip was gentle. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she sniffled, finally gathering the courage to speak. I was showing Mr. Anderson the way to the washroom, and she stammered, her voice breaking. He touched me, and when I tried to leave, he grabbed my wrist. Chunguk froze, his dark eyes narrowing as a cold fury radiated from him. The room seemed to drop a few degrees as he processed her words. That, he muttered under his breath, his tone deadly calm. He reached for the first aid kit, pulling out antiseptic and band-aids. Kneeling in front of her, he gently held her hand. His movements, though precise, carried a surprising tenderness. One winced as he applied the antiseptic, but he didn't scold her for flinching. I will handle this, he said firmly, wrapping her wrist in a clean bandage. His touch lingered for a moment before he stood, his towering figure exuding menace. Turning toward the door, he adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket. His expression cold and unreadable. Master, please don't. It might cause trouble. She whispered, her voice shaky. He stopped, looking over his shoulder at her. Trouble for him, maybe not for me. He said sharply, his voice softened slightly as he added, "Stay here, I will be back." Before she could protest further, Jungkook strode out of the room, his long steps carrying him to the party area. The atmosphere shifted the moment he entered, his presence silencing the chatter. Spotting Anderson, who was laughing with another guest, Jungkook marched up to him. Without a word, he grabbed Anderson by the collar and slammed him against the nearest wall, the sound echoing through the room. "How dare you lay a hand on her?" He growled, his voice low but filled with little intent. "What are you talking about? I didn't." Jungkook's fist connected with his jaw, cutting him off mid-sentence. The force sent Anderson stumbling, his hand clutching his face in shock. "Don't even try to deny it," he snarled. "You think you can touch what's mine and walk away unscathed?" The guests gasped, some stepping back while others whispered among themselves. Anderson, now trembling, raised his hands defensively. I didn't mean anything by it. It was a misunderstanding." Another punch landing squarely on his stomach, and he doubled over in pain. "The only misunderstanding here is that you thought you would get away with it." Jungkook spat, his voice colder than ever. Security appeared, summoned by the commotion. Jungkook gestured toward Anderson with an icy glare. "Get him out of here. He's banned from my property. If I see him again, I will make sure he regrets it." The guards nodded, dragging a beaten and humiliated Anderson out of the mansion. Jungkook adjusted his suit, brushing off non existent dust before returning to his room. When he walked in, Wine was still sitting on the couch, her white eyes filled with worry. His gaze softened ever so slightly as he approached her. "It's done. He won't bother you again," he said curtly. "Thank you, Master," she whispered, her head bowed. "Don't thank me." Just he hesitated for a moment before adding, "Take care of yourself, and if anyone tries something like that again, you tell me immediately." She nodded, her heart racing not just from fear but from the strange mix of protectiveness and danger in his tone. As he turned to leave, she couldn't help but wonder what had made him react so fiercely on her behalf. After a week, one was dusting the shelves in Jungkook's office when a sudden ring broke the silence. His phone, lying on the desk, was vibrating nonstop. He had left it behind when he went into the bathroom. She glanced at the phone hesitantly, her curiosity piqued by the unknown number flashing on the screen. She debated whether to pick it up, but ultimately she decided against it. "It's not my place to answer it," she thought, gently placing it back down. As the phone stopped ringing, Wine's gaze shifted toward the screen. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the wallpaper, an image of a girl's back. The girl's long hair cascaded down in soft waves, and there was a delicate hair clip holding the strands at the sides. "Who is she?" Wine wondered, frowning. "Master never had a girlfriend, so who is this girl?" As Wine stared at the image, a chill ran down her spine. The hair clip on the girl's head looked strikingly familiar, almost identical to the one Wine had worn that morning. She blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up her neck. No, no, no. Why would Master set a picture of someone with my hair clip as his wallpaper? She thought, her heart racing. This doesn't make sense. Suddenly, she heard the sound of the bathroom door opening. Panic surged through her, but her hands trembled uncontrollably. Jungkook's cold voice cut through the air. What are you doing? She froze, her body stiffening. Her mind went blank as she turned to face him. Jungkook's sharp eyes immediately catch sight of the phone in her hands. His expression shifted, a flash of something unreadable passing over his face before he stormed toward her. Before she could speak, he snatched the phone from her grasp, his fingers brushing hers in the process, leaving her startled and confused. Someone was calling, she said softly, still trying to collect her thoughts. Junko didn't seem to acknowledge her words. He quickly glanced at the phone, his frown deepening before he looked up at her. Do your work, I will take care of this. He ordered his own terse. Wine nodded nervously, but the question that had been plaguing her thoughts refused to leave her. She hesitated, then blurted out the one thing that had been bothering her. Can I ask something? He raised an eyebrow, his eyes cold but curious. Whose is that girl on your wallpaper? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her anxiety clear in her eyes. Jungkook's gaze flickered for a moment, something flickering in his expression that Wine couldn't quite place. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his lips tightened as if carefully considering his response. The silence hung in the air, thick and heavy, as Wine waited for an answer, her heart pounding in her chest. Jungkook's piercing gaze lingered on her as she asked about the girl in the wallpaper, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold yet strangely vulnerable. What do you want to know? Wine's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. She didn't know why she felt this sudden curiosity about the girl, but something deep inside told her that this was important. I just thought maybe you had someone special. She hesitated. I mean, I don't know, but I have never seen anyone like her before. Jungkook's lips curled into a small, almost sad smile. His eyes softened as he took a step closer to her. His voice suddenly gentle. I do have someone special. That girl in the picture. He paused as if trying to find the right words. Then, with a deep breath, he continued, I love her. The words hit Wine like a sharp blow, and her stomach sank. She tried to compose herself, but the sadness crept into her eyes. Without saying another word, she turned to leave, but before she could move, Jungkook reached out, his hand grabbing her wrist and pulling her back toward him. Where are you going? His voice was low and commanding, but there was a subtle desperation in his eyes. She couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze, her heart itching with something she couldn't fully explain. I will go back and make lunch for you, master. She tried to pull away, but Jungkook's grip on her was firm. Without warning, he guided her to the office desk and gently placed her on top. standing between her legs as she leaned in close. Why are you sad? His voice dropped to a husky whisper. Wine's breath catch in her throat, and she stared down at her hands, unable to look him in the eye. She didn't speak. I'm not sad, master, she replied softly, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. I'm just a maid. Jungkook's jaw tightened. He wasn't buying it. Do you want to see the girl I love? Wine's heart fluttered nervously, but she nodded silently. Jungkook didn't wait for her to say anything more. He grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet, leading her to the large mirror in his office. Here she is, the girl I fell for. Wine's eyes widened as she stared at the reflection. The girl in the mirror was her. Her heart skipped, her breath catching her throat as she pointed at herself, confusion written across her face. Me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Chunguk nodded, his gaze intense. Yes, you. But master, I'm just your maid. What will people say? Her voice cracked as she looked down at the floor, her fingers nervously fit getting Jungkook step closer to her. Wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against him in a possessive embrace, he rested his chin on her shoulder, his voice a soft murmur. Let them say whatever they want. His lips brushed against her ear as he spoke, sending a shiver down her spine. I don't care what anyone thinks. I only care about you. But, Master, she felt the words bubble up in her chest, but she couldn't finish them. Jungkook? First of all, it's Jungkook from now on, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. And second, he paused, his thumb tracing her lower lip. You're not a maid anymore. You're my girlfriend. His words echoed in her mind, and for a moment she could hardly breathe. She searched his eyes for any trace of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity. You're mine, and nothing else matters.